Hello, children. Come in. I won't bite, I promise. I just want to tell you a tale while you relax in a nice, warm bath of searing hot broth. But before we get started, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and click that little bell thingy to get notified. I post regular movie reviews and gameplays, all with a horror theme to them. So trust me when I say that you won't want to miss what's coming. Don't believe me? Stick around to the end of the episode to find out what movie we'll be discussing next time. And now, let me take you to a time long, long ago, back before you were even born. Back to the late 18th and early 19th centuries, which brought about a lot of changes for Europe. The Industrial Revolution was up and booming, bringing about a lot of newfangled inventions like the steam engine, and machinery that made traditional jobs like farming much less intensive and time-consuming. Charles Darwin was suddenly a thing, and the Age of Enlightenment began preaching science as superior to all other forms of thought. And in response to this, the Romantic era popped up in the year 1800, which emphasized emotion over reason, nature over urban living, and the idea that things used to be better back in the medieval period, which, when you compare the days of the slave trade to the days of regular witch hunts, yeah, I'm not sure that any time period has the right to argue superiority. But why am I bringing this up in a review for a 2020 horror movie? Well, the spread of Romanticism suddenly revived an interest in fairy tales, and in recording fairy tales as a means to keep the simple tales of the past alive. Add to that the fact that the 19th century also brought about an interest in German nationalism because they had recently been invaded by Napoleon and were desperate to preserve their culture before it all became diluted by the French. And you've got the perfect climate to produce Jacob Ludwig Karl Grimm and Wilhelm Karl Grimm, or as they're better known, the Grimm brothers. The two of them claimed to have traveled all over Germany so that they could listen to these stories straight from the peasants' mouths and record them in their truest forms, but that isn't necessarily true. In reality, they just kind of asked one woman. Her name was Dorchen Wild, and she wasn't even a peasant. Her father was a pharmacist, and she later went on to marry Wilhelm. Another myth about the Brothers Grimm is that their version of the fairy tales is always grittier and more violent than what we see in the Disney movies. Well, that was most certainly true of some stories, and especially the ones recorded in their first edition. The brothers went on to edit the stories for years, taking away the more sexual elements, toning down the violence, all so that these stories would sell better to parents. See, this stuff was going on even in the 19th century. But one story never really seemed to change all that much, and that's the one that we're talking about today. Hansel and Gretel. The story of a pair of siblings abandoned by their mother. Yeah, it was their biological mom in the first edition and their stepmom in later versions. The narrative always follows them to a candy-coated house owned by a cannibalistic witch. The kids trick the witch, Gretel throws her into an oven, and they live happily ever after, usually with the mother dying and their kindly father welcoming them back home. This story has been interpreted as a coming-of-age story, with the kids being forced into the great wide world, facing hardships, and ultimately overcoming them. That, mixed with the more gruesome elements, cannibalistic witches, getting thrown into the woods with nowhere to go, burning alive, and it's very easy to adapt this fairy tale into a horror movie. I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't been done before, at least not to my knowledge. But in October of 2018, it was announced that Anthony Perkins' son, Oz Perkins, had begun work on a screenplay that would remain faithful to the original adaptation, but would focus more on Gretel's coming of age, aging her up to about 16. All of that sounds pretty solid, but now that the movie is out, how does it hold up? Is it really a worthwhile adaptation of the Grimm brothers' original vision, or is it just a waste of time? Let's talk about 2020's Gretel and Hansel. So the movie opens up on Gretel, played by Sophia Lillis, sitting in an interview for a housekeeping job with this creepy old dude. He's creepy from minute one, requesting that she call him Milord, which... But what really gets under her skin is when he asks her if she's still a virgin. All of a sudden, Gretel decides that food isn't that important and she walks out of the interview, something that her mother takes great issue with. You see, Gretel's father died before the events of this movie, and the family has been struggling to get by ever since. So when Gretel comes back, still unemployed, Mrs. Hansel and Gretel gets so offended by this that she kicks the children out of the house. Which, yes, is bad, but can we take a second here to talk about what time period we're in? The clothing and the architecture all screams some vague time in the past, but the characters don't really act like they're from the past. Usually, period pieces try to alter the dialogue in some way to indicate that we aren't in the modern day. But everyone here just keeps talking like it's the 21st century and they're just chilling at the mall. I found Gretel to be especially bad for this. She'd just walk right up to someone and say, hey. And I didn't realize how much that would confuse me until I saw this movie. The other thing that really confused me is, if this is some vague time in the past, then what is Gretel doing? My first thought was that Gretel, at 16, should probably be married off by now, which would at least put a little bit less strain on the family. But considering we really don't know what country or time period this is, that's kind of hard to say. I'm assuming that all of this is set in Germany in the Victorian period. But if that's the case, then my assumption was wrong, considering the average marrying age for peasant girls at the time was between 19 to 22. But regardless, whether Gretel should be getting married or not, she should still be protecting her reputation a little better than this. You know what would happen if you walked out of an interview with a creepy old dude in the Victorian period? You got labeled a slut. You know what would happen if you got labeled a slut? Your reputation would be ruined. It would be a lot harder for you to get married off, and your entire existence, including financially, would suddenly become a lot harder. I mean, from a modern day perspective, yay, girl power. But from a Victorian perspective, girl, what are you doing? Anyway, Gretel and Hansel wander about the woods for a little while, getting hungrier and hungrier, until they suddenly come across this cute little cabin with a full feast laid out inside. Anyway, the owner of the cabin is an elderly woman who invites them to stay with her as long as they need, after they offer to do chores for her. Everything seems to be going well. They have delicious feasts laid out for them every single day, although they don't know where the food is coming from. And Gretel can't stop having dreams of children beneath the house. Eventually, the elderly woman recognizes a strange gift in Gretel and offers to teach her witchcraft, which Gretel eagerly accepts. It's Hansel that takes issue with these teachings, warning Gretel that she doesn't want to become too different, lest other people fear her, prompting Gretel to kick him out of the cabin. Come morning, she begins to regret this decision. She tries to search for Hansel, but she can't seem to find him. And around the same time, her dreams become more sinister. She sees the elderly witch turned young and creating the feast that she eats every day from the organs of children. I'm about to get into spoilers now. If you don't like that, this is the time that I stop talking about the ending. But, I mean, come on. It's a centuries-old fairy tale, and there aren't many surprises here. The witch reveals to Gretel that in order to achieve the power that she has now, she had to kill and eat her own children. And she advises Gretel to let go of the one thing she cares about in order to achieve the same power. And by that, I mean that she has Hansel locked in the basement, and she wants to force Gretel to eat him. Just before she can, however, Gretel shoves her into the oven instead. Hansel tries to persuade Gretel to come back to the village with him, but she refuses, choosing to stay at the cabin alone and continue practicing witchcraft. And now, Perkins has stated that this story is about realizing that the people you love are actually holding you back from personal growth. And I can see how he sees that, but I don't think the message was communicated as clearly as it could have been. If that was the point of the story, then we should have seen Hansel getting in Gretel's way from the very beginning. We see it a little bit when Hansel gets upset at Gretel for practicing witchcraft, but even that isn't handled as well as it could have been, because Gretel just responds by throwing him out of the cabin. She doesn't let his opinions affect her at all. She doesn't become sad or discouraged. She just sort of tosses him out and then moves on with her teaching. And the weird thing is, this is a theme that I've seen in a movie recently, and that I think was handled much better there. Hold on to your seats, folks, because you're going to be surprised by the movie that I'm referring to. Blumhouse's Fantasy Island. Yeah, I had my issues with that movie, but the Party Boys subplot showed exactly what Perkins is talking about, and in much less time, too. JD and Brax were brothers, and when Brax got kicked out of the house for being gay, JD followed him. JD gave up everything to support his brother, and now, even though they're clearly in their 30s, they're still living together because of that decision. It's to the point that JD's girlfriend broke up with him because she didn't like how much time he was spending with Brax. And although JD pretends that it doesn't bother him, it clearly does. He just chooses to live with it because he doesn't want to leave Brax alone. In Gretel and Hansel, we see none of that level of sacrifice. If Hansel wasn't around, Gretel still would have walked out of the interview, still would have gotten kicked out of the house, and still would have ended up at the witch's cabin. If anything, Gretel is the one pulling Hansel down. If it wasn't for her, he would have at least gotten the housekeeping job. That, mixed with the very clumsy dialogue, and we have something in this movie that I've never seen before. A complete imbalance of plot and visuals. Because the visuals in this movie are stunning. Every single shot could be turned into a painting that I'd gladly hang on my wall. The design of the witch, both in her older and younger forms, is gorgeous. The woods are gorgeous. The architecture is gorgeous. Everything is gorgeous, and it's to the point that I can almost forgive this movie for the fact that the story isn't fully realized and the characters suck. I don't really know what to do with this movie. Technically speaking, I should hate it, but I mean, come on. Look at this shot. How could I hate something this beautiful? I read one review that said that this movie should have been a 3-minute Marilyn Manson music video instead of a 90-minute movie, and I sort of agree. As much as it would have been a shame to shave off some of these visuals to fit a shorter runtime, it's also sort of a shame to waste these visuals on such a lackluster story. It isn't a bad movie per se. If they had given the script just a couple more run-throughs, it could have been an impactful story at least. But as it is, it's a completely forgettable story paired with unforgettable visuals, and I really don't know what to do with that. Is this story at least as dark as the original fairy tale? Yeah, I'll give it that. It has the biological mother kicking them out. It has the cannibalistic witch. It even finds new ways to be twisted by having the witch eat her own children. But simply being dark does not a good movie make. It's cool that they wanted to honor the Grimm brothers by modernizing their fairy tale, and I even like that they kept the whole coming-of-age theme. But there was a lot more work that needed to be done to keep this story fresh. Now, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and click the little bell thingy to get notified, because next week we're talking about 2020's The Lodge, and trust me when I say that you won't want to miss that one. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and while you're down there, why don't you leave me a comment? Let me know which Grimm fairy tale you think should be turned into a horror movie next. Thank you so much for watching, my pets, and I will see you next time. Love you.